Many underestimate the intelligence of a child, but this monster would soon find that he chose the wrong victim, the last victim he would ever have the opportunity to harm. Because this 9-year-old outsmarted her kidnapper by using tricks she had seen on her favorite true crime TV shows, and she led investigators right back to him. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna, and this is a new installment of our Survivor series. And this little girl is probably one of the youngest that we've ever covered, and probably one of the bravest and smartest. Now, that does not take away from the smartness or the braveness of any other survivor, but I just have to say there's something so unique about this little girl and what she really did to survive, all the little things that she was able to remember that she had learned or that just came to her in her time of survival. And I'm so happy I came across her story and can share with you guys, because I've only seen it covered a few times and there weren't as many details as I was able to find. And so hopefully I can bring you something new if you have heard her story of Janette Tomeo. But I'm just so excited to bring it to you. But first, let's take a moment for our sponsor. Now, with all of the difficulties around healthcare for women, I'm so happy that I have found a safe and easy way for anyone to get their sexual and reproductive healthcare needs taken care of. And I want to thank our sponsor, Nurex, for that. They help you take control of your own health with no judgment or stigma. They're a digital healthcare platform that allows you to get expert healthcare from licensed medical providers, and they have easy access to around 50 different birth controls, as well as mental health treatment plans for all of your concerns, all tailored to you. This is not a one-size-fits-all. And if the licensed medical providers deem it appropriate, then they will give you a prescription that can be shipped straight to your door in discreet packaging. In this day and age, I think it's so important for us to have a platform like this, and Nurex prides themselves on helping women be their own advocates. So if you want to go ahead and get control of your healthcare, you can go to nurex.com/Brooke Mckenna to get started, or click the link in the description. That's nurx.com/Brooke Mckenna, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2003 in California, and the Tomeo family lived in San Jose. This included 9-year-old Janette, and on Friday, June 6th of 2003, she would be walking home from Blossom Valley School, where she was a 4th grader. This was around 3 p.m., of course, right after school, and she had no idea she was being watched as she walked. After she got safely inside, she heard a knock on the door, and unfortunately, she was the only one home. Shortly after, Janette's mother, Rosalie, and her older brother, who was 15-year-old Pablo, arrived home. And only 9 minutes after their arrival, Rosalie would begin to scream to her neighbors, who were the Monzons, for help. These neighbors had heard a scream prior, but they believed this was just kids playing outside. And now they saw Rosalie at their gate, frantically shaking. She was bleeding. She was screaming at them to call 911, and that he had taken Janette. The Monzons called the police around 4:37 p.m. and by this point, Rosalie was still bleeding. She was in a daze, but she was trying to climb up into her truck, telling her neighbors that she was going to go and follow this guy to track him down. But the Monzons did calm her down and tried to tell her just to wait for the police. She was in no condition to be driving at all, even though she desperately wanted to go and find her daughter. But due to the language barrier, when the police arrived, they actually believed that this was just a carjacking. And then they quickly realized it had been a kidnapping, and there was blood everywhere. There was a bloody struggle in the home, in the garage. There was bushes that had been driven over in their driveway. There was just chaos everywhere. And then when the police began to ask who the suspect was to Rosalie, she was too shaken to respond. But then 15-year-old Pablo, Janette's brother, told him that it was a Mexican guy, but he didn't know who he was. While the search for Janette and her abductor began, her brother and her mother were sent to the hospital for their injuries. They were actually in pretty bad shape. And they began to tell the police that evening, that afternoon, when they had arrived home, Pablo had actually gotten out of their truck to try to open the garage door. He had clicked the button on the clicker, but it would only open halfway before it would close once again. So he kept trying the same thing. It happened. And then that third time when he clicked it and it started opening, he just slipped right under the door to kind of see what was going on, to stop it from going back down. And that's when he would be met with the reason that it kept closing. There was a hand suddenly around his throat, and this man grabbed the garage door with the other and shut it. When Pablo screamed, Rosalie ran out of the truck, but it was too late to get through the garage, so she ran in through the front door. And that is when Rosalie came face to face with this man who was now dragging her son by the hair. Rosalie yelled at this man in Spanish, asking what he wanted, and this man paused before saying in Spanish, "You know what I want." He was beating Rosalie to the point where she could not see. There was blood everywhere, and she began fighting him. She was scratching at his face, biting his fingers, trying to get him to stop. She was protecting her children. And this fight was said to last for around 9 minutes, which is an awful long time for a fight when you think of actually being in that fight. And by this time, Pablo was actually able to get out of his grasp, and he ran outside to get help. But this man would run into the garage, and he would open the garage door, he would get into his car, and he would speed off. But Janette was still in the back of the car. Rosalie was devastated. She was trying to protect her daughter, and she couldn't do anything, but she was in such bad shape that Pablo actually thought his mother was dead. And so when he ran for help, he assumed his mother was dead, his sister was being abducted. So he just ran to get someone, and eventually Rosalie did get enough adrenaline to stand up even though she was bleeding from her head, and to go ask her neighbors for help as well. But the car had already been driven off so fast that it went over their bushes and was just screeching down the road. But investigators would then speak to the neighbors of the Tamayo's, hoping to get more information on this man, on what had happened. And thankfully, these were very alert neighbors who had security systems as well. And one woman named Karen Camfault would say that she had actually gotten footage of the kidnapping and the kidnapper's car when he turned onto the Southwind Drive in his silver 4-door sedan. He also had a tinted rear window and chrome hubcaps. He had parked in a shady spot under a tree next to the Tamayo's house. Another neighbor of the Tamayo's, the husband of the Monzon couple, he was named Ray, and he said that he left around 3:30 p.m. to go pick up his daughter from school, and he saw the car parked there, and as he kind of drove by, he met the guy's eyes, and this was a young Latino looking man looking back at him, and Ray believed this man was just kind of resting in the shade. It was a very hot day. But he also got a strange feeling, enough so that he went and closed his garage and made sure it was closed and locked. But then while he was doing that, he was beating himself up because this guy just looked like a decent man. But it turned out that odd feeling was correct. And the story of Ray Monzon was confirmed on Karen's footage. It watched as he drove by this car. And then, after Ray had driven by, this man got out of the car and walked towards the Tamayo home. A few minutes later, the Tamayo's garage door was opened, and this man walked out of the garage, back to his car, and backed his car into their garage. At this point, the neighbor, Ray Monzon, came home, and he saw that the car was gone, so he didn't think much of it. He thought the situation had just handled itself. But when Janette's biological father, who was Pablo Vasquez, watched the news that night, that's how he would learn that his daughter was missing.
The young girl was abducted from her home after school. Police have no leads in the disappearance of 9-year-old Janette Tamayo.
You see, Janette lived with his ex-wife, Rosalie, and her new husband. And so he then went to the police to see if he could help. He was questioned by investigators if he knew anything about her whereabouts, and he claimed he didn't, saying that he was just sad and he wanted his daughter to live. And so they let him go, and he was very, very communicative and helpful in the investigation. Rosalie would tell investigators that the man that she had fought, the man who had taken her daughter, had very strange eyes, as though he was drugged. And the next morning, Rosalie was still in the hospital for her injuries. She had a gash on her head with 36 stitches, and she then checked herself out against the doctor's wishes to help find her daughter. She asked a detective for a ride home. Pablo was actually covered in bruises, including one that was on his eye from this fight, and at this point, he was still getting treatment in the hospital. But Pablo actually wanted to help in a different way. He wanted to give them a description of this attacker. He would then help them create and distribute a sketch. Pablo had a really good memory, and investigators noticed this right off the bat, that he was able to give them so many details about the fight, about this man, about everything that happened. It was so helpful, and you could tell that Pablo just wanted to find his sister. He was very emotional. You could tell he loved his sister so dearly and was going to do anything to bring her home. Now, investigators' greatest fear at this point was, of course, Janette being killed, but also, if she was still alive, being taken to Mexico. It was believed that this abductor was a complete stranger, and this became a nationwide manhunt. The entire community was involved, demanding answers, fighting for this little girl's rescue. A helicopter was flying around the community, and there was actually a recording being sent out telling Janette that they were looking for her. Then, late Sunday night, so 3 days since Janette had been taken, the police got a call from East Palo Alto Market, and the owner claimed that a little girl was walking around and asked to use his phone. Now, he said that she had dialed a San Jose number, and the owner realized that the missing girl on the news was from San Jose as well. This little girl looked like she could be her age. It was around 15 miles from her home. And so he ended up calling the police to tell them he believed this was Janette. By 10:30 p.m., investigators arrived at this market to talk to this young girl, and they were shocked at what she had to say. Not only did she identify herself as Janette Tomejo, she said she could catch her abductor. She began taking items out of her pockets that were evidence against the abductor. And even the highly trained investigators were shocked, standing there looking at this 9-year-old girl with her mouths wide open, because she had literally brought them this man's fingerprints. But that wasn't all that she was going to do. Janette then told investigators that she could take them back to the house that she was held captive in. And also, she knew the name of the pizza restaurant where they had ordered delivery from. So instead of asking to go home or go to the hospital, she got in the back of the police car and told them where to go. She was telling them left and right, stop here, stop there, and then she pointed at the exact address on Deerwell Way. So investigators shared that address with the pizza restaurant where she said they got delivery from, and that restaurant confirmed that they had delivered to that residence. And then the police received a tip also about that very residence, saying that a man, a kidnapping suspect, was in the attic. This was only a few blocks from Janette's home where she was taken. As Janette was taken to the hospital, she was given medical attention. Her family members were told, and they were coming to see her. Investigators raided the home that she had pointed out in the early morning hours of that Monday. They wasted no time fearing that this man would flee, and in the garage they would find the same car that was in Tomejo's surveillance footage going into their garage. They knew they were in the right place, and Janette had even drawn them a layout of the home and exactly where to go. When they went to the attic, they found the man, and he was preparing to flee. So as SWAT snuck upstairs, they found this man who had injuries to his face, scratch marks that Rosalie had claimed to have given him. They believed they had caught him, and so Janette's brother Pablo was taken to the police station so he could identify this man that he had made the sketch of, who had beat him and his mother up in the house and taken his sister, and he pointed right at this man. Investigators would identify him via fingerprints as David Mattel Cruz, but that wasn't his name. On Tuesday, Janette was reunited with her entire family and was surprised by a party with family and friends and balloons and teddy bears. Everyone was so happy. Pablo was grinning ear to ear even though he had this giant black eye on his face. And Rosalie said it was like Janette was born for a second time. They were thrilled. And the first thing that Janette actually said was to her mother. She went up and touched Rosalie's face and said, "You're hurt." She just wanted to make sure that her family was okay, even though she was the one who had been abducted. But you're probably wondering what exactly happened. How did she have the wherewithal to escape and bring evidence and know where she had been at? Well, during an interview on Wednesday, so that next day at her residence, Janette would bravely detail the events of her abduction. She claimed that she had gotten home from school around 3:10 and the door was a bit open, but she thought maybe her mother was just home. She then walked a little bit further and saw that there was a broken window in her bedroom, and she believed a few things were missing. This was very concerning to her, and before she could even do anything, she had gone over to the phone. She had tried to pick it up, but it wasn't working. Suddenly, she saw a man staring at her through the glass door.
There was a man knocking on the door, and I don't know what he was doing there. I was like, what could he want? And when he was asking me questions, he was kind of peeking inside, trying to see who was in there with me. And that started making me feel really uncomfortable, and I started slowly closing the sliding door. And he put his hand in the way, slid it open, grabbed me, and took me to my brother's room. He started to rape me. I was trying to get away. I started kicking him. He kept grabbing me, but I couldn't do anything, and I was just scared. And as soon as he was doing what he was doing to me, I started to cry. I was in pain. I was scared, and it was just the most horrific feeling I could have felt.
Janette was then bound with a rope as well as handcuffed behind her back and left for a few moments before being taken to the back seat of this man's vehicle. And then in the garage, she would see her brother coming inside, and she screamed at him to watch out as this man began beating him and knocking him on the ground, trying to step on his neck. She begged this man not to kill her brother and to just take her. After this 9-minute fight in the house, Janette was stuck in the backseat of this car, bound and handcuffed. She was then driven away from her home by this man, and she tried to call out for help from the car window to this truck that was beside them. And when she did so, the abductor would take a screwdriver, stab her in the forehead, and then in the chest, and tried to stab her in the neck, but missed. And as she was bleeding, she believed she was going to die. She was then taken to this oldish home that had sheets on the windows. And that is when the fight for her life began. This 9-year-old was held in a 2-story home in the 2nd-story bedroom, and she was sexually assaulted repeatedly. He at one point asked her if she wanted to shower, handcuffed her to the shower, and during that time was the only time he didn't touch her, so she actually stayed in there for hours to get away from him. But this little girl had a fight inside of her, a plan to humanize herself to him and to escape. She was going to get him to trust her.
My fear turned into courage, and I told myself, I'm a fighter. I'm gonna make it.
See, Janette Tomejo, she loved watching true crime shows such as CSI and Law and Order with her brother Pablo. And she had learned a thing or two about survival without really even knowing it. She began to realize she couldn't fight off this man physically. She needed to be cool-headed and calm, and she needed to outsmart him. Janette continued to talk with this man. Even though she was scared, even though she was angry, she never let the man see these emotions. And this wasn't something that Janette said came easy to her. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to punch him. She wanted to fight. But she knew that she needed to do this to trick him, and it was working. He at one point took off her handcuffs and let her leave the bedroom, only to later put on the handcuffs again, but this was a time period where she was free. Janette then began talking about her future, her family, her life, as though they were friends and though she was going to have this future. And that's when she started getting TV privileges. And so she got to see her mother and brother on the news. And that is when she realized they were still alive. Because at this point, she had wondered if they had died during that fight with this man in their home. And so, knowing her family was alive, she fought even harder to get back to them. She then was watching this show about bunnies and testing for asthma, and at 9 years old, she had enough awareness and intelligence to use this in her favor. Janette told her abductor that she had asthma, and she needed her medication or she was going to die. She then started heavy breathing to the point where the abductor kind of freaked out and put her in the bathroom. Again, she didn't know if this was going to work at all, but she just was doing anything she could to stay alive. Then, when the abductor wasn't around, Janette figured out how to actually get out of her handcuffs, and she was going around and grabbing some items from the home as evidence, where hopefully his fingerprints would still be on them. This included a broken watch, her underwear, and some modeling clay. She had remembered that on CSI and Law and Order, they were always looking for clues, for fingerprints, and so these were her clues, her evidence, her proof. Now she just had to escape. So one time when her abductor took a shower, she began to, move this evidence into her pockets, put her bloody shirt inside the pizza box, and she was then yelling out for help in the window. This man would then hear her and threaten that he would kill her and try to smother her with a pillow. Janette was begging for her life, and thankfully he stopped. But before she knew it, her abductor was then forcing her back into the backseat of his car and was driving her somewhere she didn't know. He then stopped at this random street corner at night, told her to get out, and said, "If you ever tell anyone about me or something, I'm going to come back and kill your family and kill you." But her threat had no weight on her strength and her passion to catch him and to tell investigators everything. The way that she outsmarted him, her quick thinking, was most likely the reason that she was allowed to live. Rosalie told the press that her daughter was very observant and strong. She had taught her to be that way. She knows how to fight, and that she is a very smart super child and is more intelligent than even her. Janette was saying that she outsmarted her attacker because she didn't want him to be able to hurt another child the way that he hurt her. But David Montiel Cruz was a 23-year-old man, and he had a criminal record of only auto theft, which he was convicted for, which is why his fingerprints were in the database. However, this was believed to be an alias, with another one possibly being Enrique Sosa Alvarez. This was not said to be his real legal name either, but he was charged under the name Enrique Alvarez with 9 felonies, including sexual assault, battery, and robbery. It was believed that he was possibly an immigrant from Mexico. But this is when Enrique's girlfriend would come forward, and it turned out there might have been a connection between this man, Enrique, and little Janette. You see, his girlfriend, who is Sylvia Gutierrez, would say that a few days prior to Janette's abduction, she had moved out of the home that she shared with Enrique. Enrique was threatening to kill himself and his girlfriend for doing so, but she moved out because of the months of abuse prior, decided to take her 10-year-old twin daughters and her 3 other children all to her sister's home. She said the day she tried to leave, Enrique tried to lock her in the bathroom, but this was 4 days before Janette was taken. He would then call Sylvia's relatives and would say, "San Jose is small. She can run, but she can't hide. I'm going to find her one day, and I'll get her." And so when Sylvia moved out, she said that these threats were nonstop. He kept driving by, he kept calling her, but on Friday, June 6th, everything stopped. The day of Janette's abduction. But Sylvia said that prior to her moving out for about a week, Enrique had been acting really strange. He was leaving the house in the middle of the night. She thought he was having an affair. Neighbors said that when Sylvia and Enrique lived together, the police had been called a couple of times in the last few months for domestic violence. But he was also 20 years older than Sylvia. But when Sylvia heard about Janette's abduction on the news, she was very worried about her because Janette was actually friends with her 10-year-old twins who would sometimes have play dates with her. Now, it's not said whether or not Enrique was ever at these play dates and met Janette, but there's a good chance he was. Sylvia was spoken to by the police, who believed that maybe she had knowledge of this kidnapping. However, it turned out that she was unaware, and she also did not believe that Enrique had ever abused any of her children. And maybe this was simply wishful thinking. However, I don't believe any of the children themselves were asked. But this brave girl, 9-year-old Janette, was finally home. And she finally let herself break down after being so incredibly strong. Janette then refused to leave the house, told her mother never to leave her. She was unable to sleep in her room alone without an adult, and she would get scared if the doorbell rang or if there was even a knock on the door. In August of 2004, the trial began, and Enrique's defense was claiming insanity. That he was severely mentally impaired, that he tested on a mentally disabled level and is incapable of knowing right from wrong. That he suffers from PTSD from being abused physically and emotionally as a kid by his father. But while they were trying to make him a victim, the real victim would testify on the stand. Janette would speak for 2 hours against her abductor in front of him. She was dressed in pink tennis shoes, a pink t-shirt, and a black sparkly shirt, holding a teddy bear. And even then, she was only 11 years old. She testified that the night before her abduction, she had slept in bed with her mom because she was scared of the dark. And then when she was bound and forced into the back of the car during her abduction, she could hear her mother fighting and screaming for her, demanding to know where her daughter was. Because like I said, Rosalie went through the front door, didn't see her daughter in the garage. And so Janette remembers screaming out for her, trying to tell her mom where she was, and her mom not hearing her. She said when Enrique got back into the car, there was blood on his face, and so she asked him if he had killed her mother. He simply laughed and said he wasn't sure. She then spoke of the horrific assaults. One was at knife point while she screamed. And she also said that this man, Enrique, had asked her at one point if she wanted to see her mother and brother for the last time. And then he showed them to her on the news. Enrique was found guilty of 10 felonies, including burglary, raping and binding Janette, and assaulting her mother and brother. The 11-year-old victim would write to the judge for her abductor to be locked away for eternity. And so this judge sentenced him to 102 years in prison with psychiatric treatment. But his defense vowed to appeal. Janette later told 2020 that she wrote for years in her diary about the pain using invisible ink. For quite some time, she never left the home. She said the fear was taking the best out of her. It was taking her over. She had to undergo years of therapy before she could actually leave home. And at 15, she tried going to the mall for the first time. And she told herself that she could do it, that everything would be okay. She told herself, no more fear. At 21, she began to study law enforcement. She wanted to be a detective just like the lead female detective on her case that brought her home. During the trial, Janette had actually given this lead female detective, who was Heather Randall, a necklace to thank her. And even at 11 years old, Heather was such an inspiration to Janette. But at this point, Heather actually told her that she was the one who was brave and smart, and that Janette was an inspiration to her. Years later, when Janette would see stories of missing children on the news, she would start to cry every single time. Her mother told ABC News that Enrique would keep Janette in a box and poke her while she was trying to sleep with a screwdriver. She said that at one point Enrique went back to check on Janette, and he said, "Oh, you're still alive. I was already thinking about how to dispose of your body." So this led at least Janette's mother, Rosalie, to believe that his plan was to kill her and to dispose of her body. And somehow, most likely because of Janette's efforts, she was alive. Because instead she survived due to her intelligence, her strength, and she is now said to be around 30 years old. But I absolutely love her motto that she got through her life with: no more fear. And she has truly inspired even me to push away fear, even while knowing the horrors of the world, that you can still be happy and cautious. We don't have to be debilitated by it. And I know for her, she had to work so many years to get to that point, and she probably even has to work through it today. So if you too are inspired by Janette and her story, just remember, no more fear. If you feel moved by that as I do, write that down below. Maybe Janette will see this. She will see how much of an impact that she has made. She believes that what she did to survive came from the shows that she was watching, the CSI, Law and Order, the different crime shows. It goes to show that this kind of content can be helpful, and it does just make us more prepared for what is out there. Awareness over fear. So thank you for listening to Janette's story. I'm honored to have found it, to be bringing it to you today. And don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough. I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.